The 1970s was a decade of profound transition and upheaval that reshaped global politics, economics, and culture. Following the revolutionary spirit of the 1960s, the 1970s represented a period where many idealistic movements confronted harsh realities. The decade witnessed the conclusion of the Vietnam War, multiple energy crises, significant political scandals, and cultural transformations that permanently altered society. This history captures the headline events that defined each year of this pivotal decade. Apollo 13 drama captivates the world. In April 1970, the Apollo 13 mission turned from routine space exploration to a dramatic fight for survival when an oxygen tank exploded en route to the moon. The world watched anxiously as NASA engineers and astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes worked together to return safely to Earth, culminating in what NASA later called a successful failure. Kent State Massacre shocks America. On May 4, 1970, National Guard troops opened fire on student protesters at Kent State University in Ohio, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others. The shootings sparked nationwide student strikes and intensified anti-war sentiment across America. The Beatles officially disbanded. The defining musical group of the 1960s officially broke up when Paul McCartney announced his departure in April 1970, marking the end of an era in popular music and culture. The gold standard ends. In what became known as the Nixon shock, President Richard Nixon announced on August 15th that the United States would end the convertibility of the dollar to gold, effectively terminating the Bretton Woods system of international financial exchange that had governed the global economy since World War II. Pentagon Papers reveal Vietnam War deception. The New York Times began publishing the Pentagon Papers in June, a classified Department of Defense study leaked by Daniel Ellsberg that revealed the U.S. government had systematically lied about the Vietnam War. The Supreme Court's decision to allow publication became a landmark for press freedom. China joins the UN. In a major diplomatic shift, the People's Republic of China was admitted to the United Nations on October 25th, replacing Taiwan and signaling China's emergence as a global power. Nixon's historic visit to China. President Nixon's February visit to the People's Republic of China ended 25 years of diplomatic isolation between the two countries and dramatically changed the landscape of international relations during the Cold War. On June 17th, 5 men were arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. Initially appearing as a minor political scandal, this event would eventually lead to the first presidential resignation in American history. Munich Olympics massacre. The Summer Olympics in Munich turned tragic when Palestinian terrorists took 11 Israeli athletes hostage on September 5th. The botched rescue attempt resulted in the deaths of all hostages, 5 terrorists and 1 police officer, bringing international terrorism into the global spotlight. Vietnam War officially ends for America. The Paris Peace Accords were signed on January 27th, officially ending direct U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. The last American troops left Vietnam on March 29th, concluding America's longest and most divisive foreign conflict to that point. Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. On January 22nd, the Supreme Court handed down its landmark decision in Roe v. Wade, establishing a woman's constitutional right to abortion and changing the landscape of American politics for decades to come. In response to U.S. support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War, OPEC countries imposed an oil embargo that quadrupled prices and led to fuel shortages across America. Long lines at gas stations became a powerful symbol of America's newfound vulnerability and economic uncertainty. Nixon resigns the presidency. As the Watergate scandal intensified with mounting evidence of obstruction of justice, Richard Nixon became the first U.S. president to resign from office on August 9th, declaring, "I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow."
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Global recession deepens. The oil crisis triggered a severe global recession characterized by the painful combination of stagnant economic growth and high inflation. Stagflation that defied conventional economic solutions and shattered the post-war economic boom. India joins the nuclear club. India conducted its first nuclear test, codenamed Smiling Buddha, on May 18th. Becoming the world's sixth nuclear power, and raising concerns about nuclear proliferation beyond the superpowers. Fall of Saigon ends. Vietnam War North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon on April 30th, culminating in dramatic helicopter evacuations from the U.S. Embassy. The fall of South Vietnam marked the complete end of the Vietnam War and a humiliating defeat for American foreign policy. Apollo-Soyuz Test Project. At the height of détente, American astronauts and Soviet cosmonauts docked their spacecraft together in orbit on July 17th, symbolizing a thawing in Cold War tensions and cooperation in space. The Thrilla in Manila. Muhammad Ali defeated Joe Frazier in their third and final boxing match on October 1st in the Philippines, concluding one of the greatest sporting rivalries in history and cementing Ali's legendary status. United States celebrates bicentennial. Amid economic troubles and post-Watergate cynicism, Americans celebrated the nation's 200th birthday on July 4th, with elaborate festivities across the country, temporarily healing some of the divisions of the previous decade. Jimmy Carter elected president, former Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter, running as an outsider promising to restore trust in government after Watergate, defeated incumbent Gerald Ford in the presidential election, ending 8 years of Republican control of the White House. Viking 1 lands on Mars. On July 20th, NASA's Viking 1 became the first spacecraft to successfully land on Mars and perform its mission, sending back unprecedented images of the Martian surface and conducting experiments to search for life. Star Wars changes cinema forever. George Lucas's space epic Star Wars premiered on May 25th, breaking box office records, revolutionizing special effects, and launching one of the most successful entertainment franchises in history. Egyptian President Sadat visits Israel. In a stunning diplomatic breakthrough, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat made a historic visit to Israel on November 19th, becoming the first Arab leader to officially visit the Jewish state and paving the way for the Camp David Accords. Elvis Presley dies. On August 16th, the king of rock and roll was found dead at his Graceland mansion at age 42, triggering worldwide mourning and elevating Elvis to mythical status in American culture. Camp David Accords. After intense negotiations facilitated by President Carter, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin signed the Camp David Accords on September 17th, establishing a framework for peace in the Middle East. 3 popes in 1 year, 1978, saw the deaths of Pope Paul VI and Pope John Paul I, who reigned for only 33 days, and the election of Polish Cardinal Karol Wojtyła as Pope John Paul II, the first non-Italian pope in 455 years, and a major figure in the eventual fall of communism. Mass suicide at Jonestown. On November 18th, over 900 members of the People's Temple cult, led by Jim Jones, committed mass suicide by drinking cyanide-laced punch in Jonestown, Guyana, shocking the world and raising concerns about cult influence. Iranian Revolution overthrows. The Shah Islamic revolutionaries, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, overthrew the U.S.-backed Shah of Iran in February, establishing an Islamic republic that dramatically altered Middle Eastern geopolitics and U.S. foreign policy for decades to come. 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. A partial meltdown at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania on March 28th caused widespread panic, galvanized the anti-nuclear movement, and effectively halted new nuclear power plant construction in the United States. Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. On December 24th, Soviet forces invaded Afghanistan to prop up a communist government, beginning a 9-year conflict that would become Russia's Vietnam and marking the end of détente between the superpowers. Iran hostage crisis begins. On November 4th, Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage in retaliation for U.S. support of the deposed Shah. The crisis would last 444 days, dominate the final year of Carter's presidency, and fundamentally reshape American-Iranian relations. The 1970s closed with Americans held hostage in Iran, Soviet tanks rolling into Afghanistan, and economic uncertainty at home, a fitting end to a decade characterized by disillusionment, crisis, and transition. Yet the decade also saw remarkable achievements: peace between Egypt and Israel, breakthroughs in space exploration, and cultural innovations that continue to resonate. The 1970s transformed America from a confident superpower to a nation confronting its limitations, both at home and abroad. The decade's legacies, environmentalism, feminism, economic restructuring, and a more complex view of America's role in the world, continue to shape our politics and culture today. As the 1980s dawned, America would respond to the challenges of the 1970s with renewed conservatism, heightened Cold War tensions, and economic policies that would define the coming decade. The 1980s fundamentally reshaped our world. From Reagan and Thatcher's conservative revolution to the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, politics underwent dramatic transformation. The decade introduced personal computers and early internet, while MTV changed how we consumed culture. Despite prosperity for some, others faced recession, AIDS, and environmental disasters. Cold War tensions peaked before an unexpected thaw, and the Berlin Wall fell as the decade closed. This brief journey through the 1980s explores a decade whose technological innovations, cultural touchstones, and political realignments continue to influence our lives today. The year began with international crisis as the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in December 1979, prompting President Jimmy Carter to announce a U.S. boycott of the Moscow Olympics. The Iran hostage crisis continued to dominate headlines, with 52 American diplomats and citizens held captive in Tehran. Against this backdrop, Republican Ronald Reagan decisively defeated Carter in the November presidential election, ushering in a new era of conservatism in American politics. In entertainment, CNN launched as the first 24-hour news channel, forever changing media consumption. The assassination of John Lennon outside his New York apartment in December shocked the world, marking a tragic end to an iconic musical career. Ronald Reagan's inauguration coincided with the release of the American hostages in Iran after 444 days in captivity. Just months later, Reagan survived an assassination attempt by John Hinckley Jr., famously quipping to surgeons, "I hope you're all Republicans." The royal wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer captivated global audiences, with an estimated 750 million people watching the ceremony. Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported the first cases of what would later be identified as AIDS, initially termed gay-related immune deficiency, marking the beginning of a devastating epidemic. In technology, IBM introduced its first personal computer, setting the stage for the computing revolution that would define the decade. A severe recession gripped much of the Western world, with U.S. unemployment reaching its highest level since the Great Depression. Reagan's economic policies, dubbed Reaganomics, faced their first major test. The Falklands War erupted when Argentina invaded the British-controlled Falkland Islands, leading to a decisive British military victory that bolstered Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's political standing. In Poland, the government imposed martial law to crush the growing solidarity movement. In pop culture, Michael Jackson released Thriller, which would become the best-selling album of all time, while Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial broke box office records. Cold War tensions reached alarming heights, with President Reagan referring to the Soviet Union as an evil empire and announcing the Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars. A South Korean passenger jet was shot down by Soviet fighters after straying into prohibited airspace, killing all 269 people aboard. The United States invaded Grenada in October, citing concerns about Cuban military presence on the Caribbean island. In technology, the Internet took a crucial step forward with the standardization of TCP/IP protocols, while compact discs were commercially introduced to the U.S. market. A television movie, The Day After, depicted the aftermath of nuclear war and was viewed by over 100 million Americans, reflecting widespread nuclear anxiety. The Summer Olympics in Los Angeles were boycotted by the Soviet Union and its allies in retaliation for the U.S. boycott of 1980. Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards, triggering anti-Sikh riots that killed thousands. The world witnessed horror in Bhopal, India, when a gas leak at a Union Carbide pesticide plant killed more than 3,800 people in history's worst industrial disaster. In Ethiopia, devastating famine prompted the star-studded Band-Aid charity single, Do They Know It's Christmas? And the subsequent Live Aid concert the following year. George Orwell's dystopian novel, 1984, received renewed attention as readers compared its fictional surveillance state to contemporary politics. Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union, introducing policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, that would ultimately lead to the end of the Cold War. The first summit between Gorbachev and Reagan signaled a potential thaw in superpower relations. The discovery of the hole in the ozone layer alarmed scientists worldwide, while the sinking of the Rainbow Warrior in New Zealand harbor by French intelligence agents created an international incident. Live Aid concerts in London and Philadelphia raised millions for famine relief in Ethiopia. In popular culture, the Nintendo Entertainment System was released in North America, revolutionizing the home video game industry. Two devastating disasters defined 1986. In January, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded shortly after takeoff, killing all 7 crew members, including teacher Krista McAuliffe. The accident was broadcast live on television and witnessed by millions of school children. In April, the nuclear reactor at Chernobyl in Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union, suffered a catastrophic meltdown, releasing radioactive material across Europe in the worst nuclear disaster in history. The Soviet government's initial attempts to cover up the accident highlighted the limitations of glasnost. The Iran-Contra affair erupted when it was revealed that the Reagan administration had secretly sold arms to Iran and used the proceeds to fund Nicaraguan rebels in violation of congressional restrictions. Black Monday, on October 19th, saw stock markets around the world crash, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average falling 22% in a single day. The crash highlighted the interconnectedness of global markets in the new financial era. Reagan and Gorbachev signed the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, eliminating an entire class of nuclear weapons for the first time. In a famous speech at the Berlin Wall,
"Tear down this wall."
Reagan challenged Gorbachev to tear down this wall. The world population reached 5 billion people, while The Simpsons made its debut as a short on The Tracy Ullman Show, beginning its path to becoming the longest-running American animated program. The devastating 8-year Iran-Iraq War finally ended, having claimed approximately 1 million lives. Meanwhile, a terrorist bombing brought down Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing all 259 people aboard and 11 on the ground. George H.W. Bush was elected U.S. President, promising to continue Reagan's policies. In environmental news, the discovery of medical waste washing up on U.S. beaches heightened concerns about pollution, while climate change entered mainstream discourse when NASA scientist James Hansen testified to Congress about global warming. The first major computer virus, the Morris worm, spread through the early Internet, crashing thousands of computers and highlighting new vulnerabilities in the digital age. The most dramatic year of the decade saw the rapid collapse of communist regimes across Eastern Europe. Mass demonstrations in East Germany led to the fall of the Berlin Wall in November, allowing free passage between East and West Berlin for the first time in 28 years. The Tiananmen Square protests in China ended in a violent crackdown, with the iconic image of a lone protester standing before a column of tanks becoming a symbol of resistance. In Poland, solidarity won landslide election victories, while the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia brought playwright Václav Havel to power. The Exxon Valdez oil spill in Alaska released 11 million gallons of crude oil, devastating the local ecosystem and prompting new environmental regulations. Tim Berners-Lee proposed what would become the World Wide Web, laying groundwork for the information revolution of the 1990s. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, few could have anticipated how profoundly this decade would shape the future. The fall of communism redrew the world map, while the technological seeds planted during these years would blossom into the digital revolution. The economic policies, cultural movements, and social changes of the 1980s continue to echo in our politics, entertainment, and daily lives decades later. The contradictions of the era, unprecedented prosperity alongside growing inequality, technological optimism alongside nuclear fear, individualism alongside global awareness, remain unresolved tensions in our own time. Perhaps this is why the 1980s continue to fascinate us. In understanding this consequential decade, we gain insight into the origins of our present world and glimpse the possibilities for our future. The 1990s was a decade of profound transformation. From the fall of the Berlin Wall to Y2K anxiety, these 10 years witnessed the Cold War's end, the Internet's birth, and dramatic political realignments worldwide. The decade juxtaposed technological innovation with ancient conflicts, economic prosperity with market crashes, and horrific genocides with inspiring democratic triumphs. What follows is a year-by-year journey through the headlines that defined this pivotal decade and shaped the millennium to come. The decade began with the historic dismantling of the Berlin Wall, which had started in late 1989 and continued into 1990. On October 3, 1990, East and West Germany officially reunified, ending 4 decades of division. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was beginning to crumble as its satellite states declared independence. In South Africa, anti-apartheid activist Nelson Mandela was released from prison after 27 years of incarceration, marking the beginning of the end for the apartheid regime. In pop culture, the Hubble Space Telescope was launched, and Tim Berners-Lee published a formal proposal for the World Wide Web, laying the groundwork for the Internet as we know it today. The year saw the official dissolution of the Soviet Union on December 26, with Mikhail Gorbachev resigning as president and the USSR splitting into 15 independent republics. This momentous event marked the definitive end of the Cold War and reshaped global politics. The Gulf War also dominated headlines as a U.S.-led coalition launched Operation Desert Storm to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi occupation. The war ended with Iraq's defeat, but left Saddam Hussein in power. In technology, the first website went online, and Linus Torvalds released the first version of the Linux kernel, beginning the open-source revolution in computing. Bill Clinton defeated incumbent George H.W. Bush to become the 42nd President of the United States, ending 12 years of Republican control of the White House. In Europe, the Maastricht Treaty was signed, establishing the European Union and laying the groundwork for the euro currency. Civil war in Yugoslavia intensified with Bosnia declaring independence, leading to ethnic cleansing and international intervention. The Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro brought environmental issues to global attention, while riots erupted in Los Angeles after police officers were acquitted in the beating of Rodney King. A truck bomb exploded in the parking garage beneath the World Trade Center in New York City, killing 6 people and injuring over 1,000 in what was, at that time, one of the worst terrorist attacks on American soil. On a more positive note, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO leader Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, setting a framework for Middle East peace negotiations. In Waco, Texas, a 51-day standoff between federal agents and the Branch Davidian religious sect ended in tragedy with a fire that killed 76 people. The European Union was officially established, and the first Pentium processor was released by Intel. Rwanda experienced one of the worst genocides in modern history, with an estimated 800,000 to 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus killed in just 100 days. In contrast, South Africa held its first multiracial democratic elections, which resulted in Nelson Mandela becoming the country's first black president. The Channel Tunnel, or Channel, opened, connecting the United Kingdom and France. In sports, Brazil won the FIFA World Cup, hosted by the United States, helping to popularize soccer in America. The year also saw the death of rock icon Kurt Cobain and the arrest of O.J. Simpson for the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. The Oklahoma City bombing shocked the nation when Timothy McVeigh detonated a truck bomb outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people in the deadliest domestic terrorist attack in U.S. history. The trial of O.J. Simpson captivated the American public, ending with his acquittal in what was dubbed the trial of the century. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by an extremist opposed to the peace process. The Dayton Agreement ended the Bosnian War. In technology, Windows 95 was released by Microsoft, revolutionizing personal computing, while eBay and Amazon were founded, marking the beginning of e-commerce. The Summer Olympics in Atlanta were marred by a bombing at Centennial Olympic Park that killed 1 person and injured 111 others. In a scientific breakthrough, Dolly the sheep became the first mammal successfully cloned from an adult cell, raising ethical questions about genetic engineering. President Clinton signed the controversial Defense of Marriage Act, defining marriage as between 1 man and 1 woman. The Taliban seized control of Afghanistan, imposing strict Islamic law. In technology, the DVD was introduced, and the number of Internet users worldwide approached 50 million. The world mourned when Princess Diana died in a car crash in Paris, with her funeral watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people. After 156 years of British colonial rule, Hong Kong was returned to Chinese sovereignty under the one country, two systems principle. NASA's Pathfinder mission landed on Mars, sending back unprecedented images of the red planet. The Asian financial crisis began, affecting economies throughout the region. Technological milestones included the defeat of chess champion Garry Kasparov by IBM's Deep Blue computer and the introduction of Netflix's DVD rental service. President Bill Clinton faced impeachment following revelations of his affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky, a scandal that dominated U.S. headlines.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
The Good Friday Agreement was signed, bringing peace to Northern Ireland after decades of conflict. In a major blow to terrorism, the real IRA bombing in Omagh killed 29 civilians. turning public opinion firmly against paramilitaries. Google was founded by Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and the International Space Station began assembly in orbit. The U.S. embassy bombings in Tanzania and Kenya by al-Qaeda killed hundreds and injured thousands, foreshadowing future terrorist threats. As the millennium approached, fears of the Y2K bug, causing global computer failures, reached a fever pitch. The euro was introduced as an accounting currency. Physical notes and coins would follow in 2002. The Columbine High School massacre in Colorado shocked America as 2 students killed 13 people before taking their own lives, sparking national debates about gun control, bullying, and violence in media. NATO bombed Yugoslavia during the Kosovo War. In technology, the term blog was coined, and Napster launched, forever changing the music industry. The world watched anxiously as the clock ticked toward a new millennium, unsure of what Y2K might bring. The 1990s ended with a mixture of optimism and uncertainty. The Cold War was over, new technologies were transforming daily life, and global cooperation seemed possible in many areas. Yet conflicts in the Balkans, Africa, and the Middle East, along with growing terrorist threats, foreshadowed challenges to come. As people celebrated the arrival of the year 2000, few could have predicted the dramatic events that would shape the first decades of the new millennium. The 2000s began with Y2K panic and ended with economic collapse. In between, our world was fundamentally transformed. The September 11th attacks reshaped global politics overnight. Smartphones and social media were born. Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq divided nations. Natural disasters from Hurricane Katrina to the Indian Ocean tsunami tested humanity's resilience. In just 10 years, the Internet became essential. America elected its first black president, and financial systems nearly collapsed. The headlines that dominated this decade didn't just capture our attention. They created the world we live in today. This is the story of 10 years that changed everything, told through the events that defined a generation and continue to shape our reality. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief as the dreaded Y2K computer bug failed to materialize. After months of preparation and billions spent on upgrades, January 1st arrived without the predicted technological apocalypse. The U.S. presidential election became one of the most contentious in history when George W. Bush and Al Gore faced off in an unprecedented legal battle over Florida's votes. The Supreme Court's 5-4 decision in Bush versus Gore ended the recount, effectively awarding the presidency to Bush despite Gore winning the popular vote. In technology, the dot-com bubble reached its peak before beginning to burst, wiping out trillions in market value. America Online merged with Time Warner in a $165 billion deal, the largest corporate merger in history at that time. September 11, 2001, redefined the decade when terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airliners, crashing 2 into the World Trade Center towers in New York City, 1 into the Pentagon, and 1 in a Pennsylvania field. Nearly 3,000 people died, and the attacks would reshape American foreign policy and domestic security for generations. In response, President Bush declared a war on terror. And by October, the U.S. and allies began military operations in Afghanistan, targeting the Taliban government that had harbored al-Qaeda. The technology world saw the debut of Apple's iPod, while Wikipedia launched online, beginning a revolution in how information would be shared and consumed. Corporate America faced a crisis of confidence as massive accounting scandals toppled energy giant Enron and telecommunications company WorldCom. The frauds led to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, imposing strict new requirements on corporate governance. In Europe, 12 nations adopted the euro as their physical currency, creating one of the world's largest unified monetary zones. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security was established in response to the 9/11 attacks, representing the largest government reorganization in over half a century. The United States and allies invaded Iraq in March, toppling Saddam Hussein's regime based on claims of weapons of mass destruction that would later prove unfounded. The invasion led to a protracted conflict and occupation that would cost thousands of American and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives. A mysterious respiratory illness called SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, emerged in China before spreading to multiple countries, offering a preview of how quickly global pandemics could develop in the interconnected world. The Human Genome Project was completed, mapping approximately 20,000 to 25,000 genes in human DNA after 13 years of research, while the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated during re-entry, killing all 7 astronauts aboard. The decade's deadliest natural disaster struck on December 26th, when a massive underwater earthquake triggered a tsunami across the Indian Ocean, killing more than 230,000 people in 14 countries. Facebook launched from Mark Zuckerberg's Harvard dorm room, beginning social media's transformation of human communication, while Google went public, setting the stage for its dominance of the Internet economy. George W. Bush won re-election over John Kerry in another close presidential contest, and the Summer Olympics returned to their ancient birthplace in Athens, Greece. Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast in August, overwhelming New Orleans' levee system and causing catastrophic flooding. The storm killed over 1,800 people and displaced hundreds of thousands, while the federal government's slow response drew sharp criticism. The Iraq War continued to intensify as casualties mounted and sectarian violence grew. Images from Abu Ghraib prison shocked the world as evidence of prisoner abuse emerged. YouTube launched, revolutionizing video sharing and creating a new platform for citizen journalism and entertainment. The video sharing platform would be acquired by Google the following year for $1.65 billion. North Korea conducted its first nuclear test in October, joining the small club of nuclear-armed nations and setting off international alarm. The test accelerated concerns about nuclear proliferation and sparked new sanctions. Twitter launched its microblogging service, starting with Jack Dorsey's simple message, "Just setting up my Twitter." The platform would go on to transform how news breaks and political discourse unfolds. Saddam Hussein was executed in Iraq after being found guilty of crimes against humanity, while Democrats regained control of both houses of Congress in the U.S. midterm elections. Apple CEO Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone in January, launching a product that would revolutionize mobile technology and change how billions of people communicate, shop, bank, and navigate daily life. The global financial crisis began to unfold as the U.S. subprime mortgage market collapsed. Bear Stearns hedge funds imploded, and major financial institutions started reporting massive losses. The final Harry Potter book was published to record-breaking sales, while the Writers Guild of America went on strike, disrupting television and film production for months. The financial crisis reached its peak in September when Lehman Brothers collapsed, triggering a global economic panic. Stock markets plummeted worldwide as governments scrambled to bail out financial institutions deemed too big to fail. Barack Obama was elected as the first African-American president of the United States, defeating John McCain in an election where the economic crisis took center stage. His victory speech in Chicago's Grant Park drew enormous crowds celebrating the historic moment. China hosted the Summer Olympics in Beijing, using the Games to showcase its emergence as a global superpower with an opening ceremony of unprecedented scale and grandeur. The H1N1 swine flu virus spread rapidly around the world, triggering the first global pandemic declaration by the WHO since 1968. Though less deadly than initially feared, it highlighted vulnerabilities in global public health systems. President Obama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize just 9 months into his presidency, a controversial decision that recognized his diplomatic outreach efforts rather than specific achievements. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, died suddenly at age 50, triggering global mourning and renewed interest in his musical legacy. His memorial service was watched by an estimated 1 billion people worldwide. The 2000s weren't just another 10 years in history, they were the blueprint for our current world. Social media platforms born then now influence global politics. Smartphones evolved from that first iPhone. Security measures after September 11th permanently changed how we travel and communicate. The financial crisis reshaped economics and altered a generation's relationship with money. Most significantly, we entered the decade mostly offline and left it constantly connected. A fundamental shift that transformed how we work, socialize, and consume information. The echoes of the 2000s continue to reverberate through our lives today. In many ways, we're still living in the world that turbulent decade created. The 2010s reshaped our world with breathtaking speed. From the aftermath of financial crisis to the brink of a pandemic, this decade saw social media transform politics, populism challenge established orders, and technology integrate deeply into daily life. We witnessed moments of profound hope: Arab Spring protests, marriage equality victories, climate accords, alongside devastating conflicts, refugee crises, and deepening cultural divides. This was a decade when smartphones connected billions while simultaneously fragmenting societies. When movements like #MeToo and climate activism gained unprecedented momentum. When Brexit and Trump's election signaled political realignments across the Western world. Through headlines that captured triumph and tragedy, technological marvel and environmental alarm, the 2010s didn't merely change our world. They fundamentally rewired it, establishing new paradigms that continue to define our present and will shape our future. The decade opened with devastation as a 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck Haiti in January, killing an estimated 220,000 people and leaving over 1 million homeless. The international response was massive, but ultimately inadequate amid corruption and logistical challenges. In technology, Apple released the first iPad, transforming the tablet market and digital consumption. Meanwhile, WikiLeaks published classified diplomatic cables, triggering debates about transparency and national security. As the year closed, a Tunisian street vendor's self-immolation sparked what would become known as the Arab Spring, launching a wave of protests across the Middle East and North Africa. The decade's most iconic headline arrived in May. Osama bin Laden dead. After a decade-long manhunt, U.S. Navy SEALs killed the al-Qaeda leader in Pakistan. President Obama announced, "Justice has been done." The Arab Spring uprisings spread across the region, toppling regimes in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, where longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi was killed by rebels. In Syria, protests against Bashar al-Assad's regime descended into a devastating civil war. A 9.0 magnitude earthquake and tsunami struck Japan, triggering the Fukushima nuclear disaster, the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl. The world watched in horror as meltdowns occurred in 3 reactors. Barack Obama secured a second term, defeating Republican Mitt Romney to remain America's first black president. The election highlighted growing political polarization in the United States. A lone gunman killed 26 people, including 20 children, at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, in one of America's deadliest mass shootings. The tragedy reignited debates about gun control, but led to little federal legislation. The scientific world celebrated the discovery of the Higgs boson particle and NASA's Curiosity rover landing on Mars. Meanwhile, Felix Baumgartner captured global attention by skydiving from the edge of space. Terror struck America again when bombs exploded near the finish line of the Boston Marathon, killing 3 and injuring hundreds. The subsequent manhunt paralyzed the city before suspects were captured. Edward Snowden leaked classified NSA documents revealing massive surveillance programs, igniting global debates about privacy, security, and digital rights. Snowden fled to Russia to avoid prosecution. Pope Benedict XVI became the first pope to resign in nearly 600 years, leading to the selection of Pope Francis, who quickly established himself as a reformist voice within the Catholic Church. The terrorist group ISIS, Islamic State, seized vast territories across Iraq and Syria, declaring a caliphate and shocking the world with brutal beheadings and mass killings. Their social media-savvy propaganda spread fear globally. The largest Ebola outbreak in history ravaged West Africa, killing over 11,000 people and triggering international panic. Healthcare workers battled the deadly virus under extreme conditions. Malaysia Airlines suffered 2 devastating tragedies. Flight MH370 disappeared without a trace with 239 people aboard, while MH17 was shot down over Ukraine, killing all 298 passengers and crew. Terrorists attacked the Charlie Hebdo magazine office in January and multiple Paris locations in November, killing 130 people in the latter attack. ISIS claimed responsibility, escalating fears of terrorism. Europe faced its largest refugee crisis since World War II, as millions fled war in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The image of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi, drowned on a Turkish beach, became a heartbreaking symbol of the crisis. The U.S. Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide in Obergefell v. Hodges, marking a landmark victory for LGBTQ+ rights. Meanwhile, the Iran nuclear deal and Paris Climate Agreement offered hope for international cooperation. the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union in the Brexit referendum, sending shock waves through global markets and initiating a complicated divorce process that would drag on for years. Donald Trump's election as U.S. president defied polls and expectations, capping a contentious campaign marked by discussions of immigration, trade, and American identity. His victory reflected growing populist movements worldwide. The Zika virus epidemic spread across the Americas, causing birth defects and prompting health warnings. Meanwhile, the Panama Papers exposed offshore tax havens used by political and business elites. The Me Too movement erupted after sexual assault allegations against film producer Harvey Weinstein, leading to a global reckoning with sexual harassment and assault. Millions of women shared their experiences with the hashtag. President Trump's first year brought dramatic policy shifts, attempting to ban travelers from several Muslim-majority countries, announcing withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, and pushing tax cuts. Terrorist attacks struck Manchester, London, Barcelona, and other cities, while a gunman in Las Vegas committed the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history, killing 58 people at a music festival. Students led nationwide protests against gun violence after 17 people were killed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. The March for Our Lives became one of the largest youth protests since Vietnam. President Trump initiated trade wars with China and other countries, imposing tariffs on billions of dollars of goods. Global markets wobbled as the post-World War II trade order faced its greatest challenge. The world watched as 12 boys and their soccer coach were rescued from a flooded cave in Thailand, a complex operation involving international experts and capturing global attention for weeks. Climate activism reached new heights as millions joined global strikes, inspired by Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg. Meanwhile, devastating fires in the Amazon rainforest and Australia highlighted environmental crises. Pro-democracy protests erupted in Hong Kong in response to a proposed extradition bill, growing into months of increasingly violent confrontations with police and challenging China's authority over the territory. The first image of a black hole was revealed, a scientific breakthrough decades in the making. The U.S. House of Representatives impeached President Trump for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, setting up a trial for early 2020. As the decade closed, few could anticipate that a novel coronavirus emerging in Wuhan, China, would soon transform the world in ways that would make the tumultuous 2010s seem like a prelude to even greater global challenges. As 2019 drew to a close, the world stood unknowingly on the precipice of a pandemic that would make the tumultuous 2010s seem almost quaint by comparison. Looking back, we now recognize this decade as a critical turning point that reshaped our collective trajectory. The technologies that defined these years, smartphones, social media, AI, fundamentally altered human interaction. Political earthquakes from the Arab Spring to Brexit challenged established orders. The decade revealed both our capacity for inspiring solidarity through movements like the Me Too movement and our vulnerability to polarization and misinformation. The 2010s left us a complex inheritance. Unprecedented connectivity, alongside deepening divides, remarkable scientific progress beside unaddressed existential threats, and powerful tools for both creation and destruction. These 10 years demonstrated how quickly established systems can transform, a lesson that would prove prophetic as we entered the 2020s. The world we navigate today, for better and worse, was forged in the crucible of this consequential decade.